Thank you very much. So we have the presentations that would be going through the period, and we would not like for anybody to miss. So please remember, a little housekeeping, keep your mic on mute. Just adding in more people. Welcome, come in, come in. Yes, so we have our mics on mute, and please use the chat box for any questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any questions at all, concerns, queries, anything that you would like to say to our presenters, please drop them in the chat and it will be addressed throughout this evening's presentation as normal. Nicely. So again, for those who have just joined, my name is Joseph Bertrand, Education and Outreach Officer at the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, and it is my pleasure to welcome each of you all here to this very special Tutbagay lecture, where we are looking at our forest's natural heritage, life, legislation, and legacy. In recognition for the International Day of Forests 2025, and the theme is Forest and Food. Yes, welcome. So again, for those who just joined, please remember to keep your mic on mute. Any questions that you would have throughout the presentation and for after, we are asking that you put them in the chat so that we can address them. Nicely. Also, as we have persons coming in, please remember that the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, we are a membership-based organization. And with that, we need all of you to be part and parcel of this movement of heritage preservation. Yeah? One person can stand and say that this building is important, but my friends, if we have 1,000, the voice is much louder. And to add your voice, join the movement that is the National Trust. We are standing up and saying that our heritage is important. We have our AGM coming up. So for our members who may not be financial, please take the opportunity to become financial and be part of steering the direction of the National Trust at our AGM. Yep. So again, welcome. Yes, come in, welcome. Thank you for joining. So we are preparing to begin our Tutbagay lecture in recognition of International Day of Forests 2025, the theme being food and forests. We have two special presenters with us this evening. Yes, come in. Don't forget, you have to ask your questions in the chat. Take a moment and locate the chat. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. As people come in, good afternoon, and we are preparing ourselves to join with Dr. Ryan Mohammed and Ms. Lanya Fanovich-Mohammed, who are going to take us through our pieces this evening. Yes, so once again, last call, please remember to keep your mic on mute while we go through this exercise. Secondly, in the chat, you can communicate with us, send your messages, and send your questions as we have this conversation around our forests, natural heritage, life, legislation, and legacy. Wonderful. So officially, I would like to Welcome, each of you. My name is Joseph Bertrand, the Education and Outreach Officer at the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, and it is my pleasure to welcome each of you to this evening's presentation or Tutbagay lecture. And we are looking at our forests, natural heritage, the life, legislation, and legacy. And our first presenter, Dr. Ryan Mohammed, who graduated from the University of the West Indies after completing his degree, his PhD in aquatic biology. 2019, he holds a Master of Philosophy in environmental biology and botany and zoology. He is also a member of the Council of the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago, and he is a strong advocate for science-influenced legislation and policy development. Within the last decade, he has served as a consultant to FAO, UNESCO, UNEP, and the IUNC on projects focused on biodiversity, aquaculture, and the blue economy. And at his side, Lanya Fanovich-Mohammed, who is a marine scientist and project manager with a decade of experience as an ecologist and outreach training expert in the northeast of Tobago. Her efforts are focused on marine and ecosystem health, community-based conservation, staghorn and pillar coral restoration, and various sustainability initiatives. She is also a contributor on the technical team for the designation of the Northeast Tobago UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Reserve at the Main Ridge Forest Reserve as a National Heritage Site. Lanya has earned her BSc in zoology with a minor in marine ecology and an MSc in science and management of the topographical biodiversity from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus. So, my friends, we have with us Dr. Ryan Mohammed and Ms. Lanya Fanovich-Mohammed, who are going to take us through our paces this evening. So I would like to welcome on this virtual podium, the Mohammeds.
Okay, thanks. Just a mic check. Everyone hearing me clear? Good
Loud
to
and
go?
clear, sir.
All right, good. So one might wonder why two aquatic persons are going to speak about forests. Well, if we consider what happens on land affects the water and adopting a ridge to reef approach in ecosystem management, we have an appreciation for our terrestrial habitats, all right? And of course, that interface between our terrestrial and aquatic habitats, the seas and rivers, is our wetlands, and we recognized World Wetland Day a few weeks ago. But today, we recognize World Forest Day, which was celebrated on the 21st of March, which was last week. So first thing, what is a forest? It is not just an amalgamation of trees. It must be land spanning more than 0.5 hectares with trees higher than 5 meters and a canopy cover. On your canopy cover is your density of leaves. When you look up how much sky you see, you must see 90% sky or less. All right, so you must have a canopy cover of at least 10%, of more than 10%, sorry, and the trees must be able to reach these thresholds in situ. So in other words, if you have a field with potted pine trees or potted palm trees, this is not a forest, okay? It must be in situ, all right? So why is forest important? So we consider the ecosystem services that they offer man, all right? In order for man to survive on this planet, there must be some sort of survival mechanism, some sort of facility that allows us to survive. And this is where the ecosystems provide services for us to exist. And this would be regulating the climate, ensuring, and this is not just temperature, but also weather systems, temperature, wind, etc. Purifying the water. And I trust if we go back to primary school, we recall the elementary water cycle. And then in secondary school, they taught us about the carbon and nitrogen cycle. So this is where our carbon dioxide is transformed into producing, and the plants help us produce oxygen, and this is what we need to facilitate life on the planet. The nitrogen cycle also allows for transfer nutrients in our ecosystems. And then also with all of this, all of these systems, this supports our biodiversity. So we need to not look at forests as a group of trees that we want to collectively call bush, but it supports many things more, all right? And these resources offered help us to ensure that we have livelihoods and different types of recreation. So on a side note, not much people would recognize that Willy Wonka actually has something to do with International Day of Forests, all right? It is a far association, but nonetheless, there's an association. So Rodal's character, Willy Wonka, searched the jungles for new flavors and foods, all right? And the theme for this year's International Day of Forests is Forest and Food. The future of food begins in the forest. So we know that the fauna contributes to ecosystem services such as seed dispersal. Our Morocco or terrestrial land tortoise, bats, even the cocorico that, and we like to associate cocoricos with being some sort of pest. It's still one of our national birds, but Moroccois, land tortoise, the bats, the cocoricos, they all move seeds within the forest and help in seed dispersal of our forest species. At the same time, forest contributes to pest and vermin reduction. The bats and the dragonflies in the forest, they eat the adult mosquitoes. Adult are pollinators in the forest and for agriculture. Guppies eat the mosquito larvae in the streams, and the streams are the main vessels through our watersheds. The boa constrictors or snakes eat the cocorico. So if we remove our large snakes, we'll have more cocoricos. And the cribbo snake in turn eats other snakes. All right, so it's all connected. But we remove elements of the system in our ecosystem, in our forests, we have a general collapse, and we then have a rise in what we deem pests. On a side note, honey production is tightly associated with forests and forest cover. The honeybees, they pollinate agriculture crops as well as forest species, but this is what they utilize to make honey. And for those of you that really like to purchase honey and you have a fine palate, you'll recognize that honey purchased in different parts of Trinidad and Tobago have a slightly different taste. And this is based on what types of fruit trees the honeybees pollinate, right? It influences the taste of the honey. And additionally, and this doesn't directly deal with food production, but it deals with health. Red howler monkeys have been utilized in the past as an indicator for spikes of threats of yellow fever. So when foresters in the past would see red howler monkeys in particular dying in the forest, they would alert Ministry of Health that there's a potential issue pending with yellow fever. But now I want to touch a little bit on poaching versus hunting. So the hunting season has just recently closed, and it opens at I believe at the beginning of October till the end of February. And the way hunting works is you have 5 schedule 2 listed game species, and you get a permit to hunt your game species in particular area. There's guidelines associated with this. But failing to conform to these guidelines, you might have a hunting permit, but if you don't conform to these guidelines, like for instance, if you're using artificial light, if you're hunting on state lands without a permit, if you're hunting outside of the open season for hunting, you are a poacher. Some people might assume that, okay, the 5 game species, you could get a permit for these, and these are the only things you're allowed to hunt with a permit. Everything else you could hunt without a permit. It's the exact opposite. Everything else is protected. Only our game species, the deer, the agouti, the lap, the peccary, iguana, caiman is also one of the game species. Iguana has a separate hunting season, but these are the ones you require a permit to hunt. But all other animals are also protected. And this means you cannot keep them in captivity nor have them for purposes of food, acquire them for purposes of food. And as I indicated before, if you remove these organisms from the wild, then we have potentially a collapse in the ecosystem. Just indicated in the slide before that forests support livelihoods. Yes, it supports livelihoods, but if you extract too much of one resource, you have a collapse in the entire ecosystem. So what we have to consider is sustainable livelihood. So if hunting is your mechanism to first sustain in your livelihood, it is not a sustainable livelihood. So we need to start to reconsider and have a behavioral change with regards to this. Now, approximately 44% of Trinidad and Tobago is covered by forests, all right? In 2020, 27% of that was classified as primary forest, but in 2001, it was 39%. 2020, 64% of the land covered in Trinidad was natural forest. However, in 2000, it was 74%. So we see in the space of roughly 2 decades, we have lost roughly 10% of our prime forestry coverage, all right? And this is not good, particularly if we consider the ecosystem services I just mentioned. Now, 79% of our 35 forest reserves in Trinidad include areas above 90 meters in elevation. There are some of the proposed national parks, prohibited areas, certain wildlife sanctuaries, nature reserves, dams, and wind belts. And one good example of the dams that fall under this is the Hollis Reservoir. If you want to access Hollis Reservoir, you need particular permission from WASA as well as Forestry Division. So all forest reserves in Tobago are managed as protection forests, and this is according to our national forestry policy. Now, our Forest Act 1915, and it was updated in 2015, but it's still recognized as 1915 Act, manages the extractive processes of forestry, and this includes 66 named forest species, named forest types of trees. And some of these timber species have additional restrictions. For example, mahogany. Now, we all would hear how good mahogany furniture is and how sturdy it is, etc. But you cannot trade internationally in mahogany because it's a CITES 2 species, and CITES is an international listing of organisms and how they are traded internationally. CITES 2 organisms are not allowed for trade, right? And so another CITES 2 species group of organisms are not allowed is trade in marine turtles, trade in coral, right? So mahogany is one forest species that has some restrictions. The Forest Act also defines spatially and temporary various forest reserves and sanctuaries. Now, as I said before, there's 35 listed forest reserves, but some of these reserves, they no longer exist according to the boundaries defined in that act, all right? Because due to unregulated removal of forests, either for quarry, agriculture or otherwise, all right? But one of the ones that are designated temporarily is the Matura Beach on Fishing Pond Beach. because it's that during a particular time of year, from the 1st of March to the 31st, these are turtle nesting periods. There's restrictive access to both of these beaches simply because of the turtles, and this falls under the turtle breeding season. This falls under the Forestry Act. But forestry protection has various levels. Now, forest reserves include areas that have been simultaneously designated as wildlife sanctuaries, such as the Trinity Hills, Bush Wildlife, Caroni Bird Sanctuary. We have prohibited areas, Carolina River, Trinity Hills again. So Trinity Hills is both a wildlife sanctuary as well as a protected area. Matura Forest, Main Ridge. And then we have marine parks, also falling under marine forestry protection. And this is the Boca Reef Marine Park and the proposed Northeast Marine Park. Okay. But you also have environmental sensitive areas, and this is under the Environmental Management Authority Act, and they list the environmentally sensitive area 2001 rules, and this names the Aripo Savannas, Matura National Park again, which is also a prohibited area, Nerva Swamp, which is also a prohibited area, and then we have our Ramsar sites, and Dr. Juman a few weeks ago would have highlighted the various Ramsar sites as types of wetlands. But we see here again in the Nerva Swamp and Caroni Swamp is also prohibited areas, and these are Ramsar sites. What I want to touch on here is that we have lots of laws, policies, regulations, rules, etc., but still limited protection. So this is why I appeal to the citizenry. It's up to us to adopt behavioral change in the way we manage our forests and manage how we utilize the forests. Now, one mechanism of managing the forest is by putting, again, a different type of title on it. And this is where the National Trust has interventions. So the National Trust has 323, and this is a dynamic list of heritage sites. Of this, roughly a third are deemed natural heritage sites. So this will include your forests, your swamps, some of your particular parks, etc. We have 17, however, roughly 15% that are that are forested assets, and the number of listed natural sites are actually only 2. We have the Main Ridge Forest in Tobago, which is grade C, as well as the Point of View Wildfowl Trust, which is a man-made wetland, and that is also a grade C. Under our grading system, now C doesn't mean it is not as good as A or B, it's just a classification, but grade C includes properties being defined as sites containing species of plants, animals, birds, fish, insects, or marine life that are vulnerable to harm from the introduction or removal of these species. Okay, so it means that given these sites a particular grade, offers some degree of protection under the National Trust Act. All right, so now I'd like to touch on some of the other sites that are not listed, but they're still on our heritage. They include some of our forest biodiversity heritage assets. This includes the Trinity Hills, and it's on our coat of arms. Hopefully it will not be removed anytime soon, but it's on our coat of arms in the corner there. And it is a habitat for environmental sensitive species. Now, we have all our marine turtles listed as environmental sensitive species according to the environmental management rules, but we also have several terrestrial animals listed as well. And as I go forward, I will elaborate on these. So the ocelot is one of our environmental sensitive species. The Aripo savanna is another one of our listed sites under the heritage assets. It's habitat for ocelots. It has more than 400 species of plants and animals identified in the Aripo savanna. 38 are restricted to the reserve, and 16 to 20 are rare or threatened. But 2, and this will include the sundew plant, which is insectivorous plant, one of the few insectivorous plants we have in Trinidad. 2 endemic floral species exist only in the Aripo savanna. In the central forest, it's again habitat for the ocelot. Cleaver Woods in North Trinidad is an area that is of particular importance for the First Peoples groups. Monespa, again, an area where there's a lot of traditional knowledge in Northwest Trinidad. And the Caltu Trace wetland in South Trinidad near Beach is habitat for ocelots as well as red howler monkey, as we see here in the picture. Mount Tanamana in Central Range, this is very famous for the Tamana caves, where it have a high diversity and density of bats. And I mentioned the importance of bats earlier, but Bamboo Cathedral and Tucker Valley, Northwest in Chaguaramas, all of these are habitats for ocelot, red howler monkeys, and particularly the Bamboo Cathedral area and Mont Bleu in the Arima Valley is one of the peaks, is the sixth highest peak in Northern Range in Trinidad, is habitat for ocelots as well as our palmy, as seen here. And it is suspected that the pawi might be one of an endemic species because the South American pawi does not have this blue dewlap underneath here. So this might be a subspecies or a species of its own. We still, right now, via the EMA, the pawi management plan is being developed. So part of that exercise is eventually to work out if the pawi we have in Trinidad might be an endemic species. Similarly, we are not sure if the red howler monkeys we have in Trinidad is an endemic species or a subspecies in comparison to what we have in South America. So El Tecuch and El Saradaripo, both of these are in the Northern Range as well. It's our tallest and second tallest peak, and both are habitats for ocelots and pawi, but also our golden tree frog. And we previously thought the golden tree frog was endemic to Trinidad, but I believe now they've found populations in the Paria Peninsula off of Venezuela. But so it might be, again, we might have a subspecies of golden tree frogs in Trinidad. We have the bush sanctuary in Nariva, which is a habitat for our manatees. And here we see the approximate distribution of the sites that I just mentioned. So you'll notice that we have several sites in Northern Range and some in Eastern Trinidad. And this coincide with the areas that we have most amount of our natural vegetation. Now, it is not that we ignore the Southwest Peninsula of Trinidad. It is, remember, the asset inventory and our listed sites these are dynamic lists that we keep adding, and we keep trying to upgrade our list to be more inclusive of a wide variety of sites. So this is a work in progress. Now, I wanted to start to touch on Tobago. Now, Tobago, the Northeast Island Complex, is a dossier for these were produced. It is right now. It is one of the sites that are under our assets, but we are reviewing the dossiers for grading. So soon, these islands, the St. Giles Islands, Little Tobago, and Goat Island, will soon potentially get a grade, and it also means that it will have additional protection for these sites. Now, on a side note, again, going back to the Forestry Act, as of 1968, Marble Island, London Bridge Rock, and for those of you that visited Northeast Tobago and familiar with London Bridge Rock, and the adjacent small islands and St. Giles Island are all included as in the Forestry Act as properties of Trinidad and Tobago. And now I'll hand you over to Lanya, and she will touch on our only listed forested site, Mainridge Forest, which is our only listed natural forest site. Okay, so Lanya.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Loud and clear.
Great. Right. So regarding the Mainridge Forest Reserve, so it is considered to be one of the oldest forest reserve in the Western Hemisphere. And it forms part of the UNESCO Man and the Biosphere Reserve. I'll go into more detail about this particular designation shortly. But just so you have an idea of the area that's being covered by the Main Ridge Forest Reserve, if you look at this entire map, this light green area in the central, in the center of all the colors here, comprises the Main Ridge Forest Reserve. And one of the key significance of it is its connection to a lot of the communities from Mariah down in the south, all the way up to Charlottesville, looping all the way around again to Roxborough, Goldsboro, Pembroke areas, etc. All right. So the significance of the Main Ridge Forest Reserve is that it is one of the first instances in which a forest or a particular area of land has been designated solely for conservation. A lot of the times in the past, during colonial times, land was usually protected more for an exploitative purpose. For example, hunting. If you read up on a lot of old stories, you would know that there was the crown's land, the king's land, where only the king is allowed to hunt and no one else is able to extract from it. But following the acquisition of Tobago by the British Empire back in the 1700s, there was a rapid expansion of the plantation economy. So you started to have plots were divided, the island was divided into several plots, and there was an aggressive clearance of land so that they can plant sugar, cocoa, citrus, etc. So the plantation economy really took off, and it took the keen insight of one Soam Jennings, who is the Commissioner of Board of Trade and Member of Parliament. He spent over a decade studying and also trying to convince the British Parliament that the forest actually plays a more significant role and is important for it to be protected. Because of some studies being done looking at the association of forest with maintaining precipitation or rainfall within a forest, so looking at transpiration, action of the trees and the rain, he recognized that if it is that the plantations were to continue to thrive, they needed to protect a portion of the forest. So it wasn't until after over a decade of really working with the British Empire Parliament that the Main Ridge Forest Reserve was proclaimed on the 13th of April, 1776, as a woods for the protection of the rains. So it wasn't even starting to look at biodiversity at that point in time. It was really just to ensure that there was always water present on the island. And again, as I mentioned, this is the first instant that an area has been protected, an example of an area being protected for an environmental purpose. So it's considered to be the oldest protected area in the world geared towards conservation. And it was only in 1904 the Rain Reserve was combined with the adjacent Crown lands and proclaimed to be the Main Ridge Forest Reserve, which we know today. And just touching a little bit, so there was an attempt, or there was some consideration considering that the Main Ridge Forest Reserve is the oldest protected area that is known. There was some consideration to declare it a UNESCO heritage site, which is probably one of the highest designations of area that you can have under the UNESCO's designation of lands. And one of the things that you need to be able to prove in an area is that it has what we call outstanding universal value. The area need to demonstrate something that's so exceptional, either culturally or naturally or both, that it has global significance and it need definite high level of protection. So we had to investigate quite closely, what were the possible outstanding universal values for the Main Ridge Forest Reserve. And unfortunately, because of a lot of our shared connections in the Caribbean and South America mainland, we could not really say that we had an outstanding universal value, according to the UNESCO Heritage Site definitions. However, I mean, just looking a little bit at the biogeography and the ecology, so this is the science side of the Main Ridge Forest Reserve. It is a continuation of the Peru Cordillera in South America. So if it is that you were to look at a map of South America and you look at that mountain range spanning from the western coast of South America, it continues up north towards Venezuela, and then it continues to the northern range of Trinidad. And the main ridge is just an extension from the northern range in Trinidad. So it more or less marks the end. So it's a long chain of mountainous region that is just now separated by a body of water. And separation that we've had has only been 10,000 years ago, which is quite small in a geological scale when you consider the age of the Earth, right? Our forest species, they're quite mixed. We share a lot of species in common with South America, as well as the Antilles in terms of the trees and the animal composition. Our forest types is a mixture of the lower montane forest, xerophytic tropical forest, which is dry forest. So that's going to comprise of more of your brittle plants, cacti, etc. Evergreen formations and elfin woodland. Now, these different forest types now create what we call ecological niches. So actual little areas and microclimates where particular groups of plants and animals can actually thrive. So you can say that, you know, you have different specializations among different plants and animals, you know, in different pockets of the forest. And then you have your generalists that will traverse amongst these different regions of your forests. And then connecting and weaving through the entire forest, you have your rivers, which are important for transporting all the nutrients from up the mountain range all the way down to the ocean. It actually acts as corridors, or what we call the blood vessels, if you can relate it to animals ourselves. It allows for the distribution of various animal and plant species. So seeds can be transported downwards, different fish, animals will follow the pathways of the rivers. So the rivers actually form that connection there. And we have about 11 watersheds, which are all important for the water that the different communities will now get in order to sustain their own livelihoods. The biodiversity in the Main Ridge Forest is quite, you know, expansive. It's very diverse. And I mean, if it is that you had to, when Environmental Research Institute Charlottesville was compiling the dossier for the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve, we had to look at all the literature that we can possibly find and collate all the different species of plants and animals that have been documented. And this list is by no means exhaustive. Every few years, we're adding new species to this list as we get further access, as we have further insight into the different species, etc. But for now, what has been documented, at least from what we could find, we have about 16 lizard species, of which I think there are about one species that's considered to be endemic. Ryan would have talked about endemic species earlier on, which are species that are found nowhere else outside of a particular geographic range. So they're quite unique to Tobago and quite exclusive, almost exclusive to Main Ridge Forest Reserve. So you have your ocellated gecko, which I have a little representation of here in the picture. We have 24 snake species. The important thing to note is that none of the snake species found in the Main Ridge or in Tobago at all is considered venomous. So they're not going to inject any sort of toxin or venom into you if you're bitten. They're all, you know, quite, yeah, non-venomous. And in one example here, and again, of a species that's unique to Tobago is the Tobago false coral snake. And those of you who are familiar with the coral snake, you can see why it's called a false coral snake, because it elicits the similar coloration to the corals that we know. We have 13 fish species. Unfortunately, species diversity for fish is quite low. And this could be several different reasons, one of them being the separation of the island from the mainland. So we have a decrease in the distribution of fish, as well as the mountainous reach. That's a totally different discussion for another time. But one iconic species that is found in the rivers, there's what we call the heart rivulus. So it's a member of the killifish. 37 mammal species, of which there are the majority of it is comprised of bats. One of them being endemic again to Tobago. So for example, this is called the Myotis Attenboroughii, who was named after Sir David Attenborough. 210 bird species, that includes all your migrants, as well as migratory species, as well as your native species, those that are indigenous species. We only have one endemic, which is the green scrublet that I have here. 15 species of frogs, of which 4 are only found in Tobago, such as this Tobago glass frog. 662 plant species. This could be quite much higher, because we're constantly adding new species to this list. And one of the famous ones is the silk cotton tree, where there's a lot of folklore associated with it, and numerous vertebrates. We're talking about vertebrates from crustaceans, insects, millipedes, you name it. Once they don't have a backbone, they are included in that list. And you would see here, I have a soldier crab or hermit crab. And for those of you who are familiar with hermit crabs, you normally associate them with the marine environment. But one of these special features of the soldier crab here is that it's one of the few hermit crabs that we can safely say actually connects our forest to our marine environments. They do go up and they live and they thrive in the forest, and then they make their way down to the ocean, where they can reproduce, as well as change their shells. They rely on the ocean, the seas, for their shells. So if we had to have a mascot to represent quite a bit of Tobago, Northeast Tobago, it will probably be the soldier crab. Climate. Just like Trinidad, there are 2 climates, wet and dry. Two seasons, wet and dry, because we're in a tropical region. But due to climate change, we're starting to see like shifts in the predictions of when the dry season is starting and when does it end, and similarly for the wet season. We're starting to see that it's probably impacting on overall health of a lot of the flora on the island, and subsequently fauna. Warm waters of the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Oceans are responsible for providing all the energy, all that warmth and moisture that's needed to energize hurricanes. And believe it or not, Tobago, Trinidad just to the south of that belt, and Tobago falls within that region. And since the colonial period, as long as hurricanes, tropical systems have been documented, at least 15 storm systems have impacted Tobago, either through direct impact or passing so close that their bands, the winds and the rains have impacted the island. And the most significant one, for those of you who may have lived during that time, was Hurricane Flora on the 30th of September 1963. And that hurricane, it caused substantial damage on the island of Tobago. and it's documented as much as 75% of the forest, the managed forest, was flattened by this hurricane. So since then, it took about maybe 25 years, a minimum of 25 years for the forest to regenerate. And much of the forest that we are familiar with currently are what we call secondary forests. Much of the primary forest that still exists is very small in area and can only be reached into the deepest parts of the Mirage Forest Reserve, but the majority of it now remains. It's called secondary forest, and this is forest that has been naturally regenerated after some sort of significant disturbance, for example. And as a result of that, that will impact on the distribution of the plant species that we have, as well as the many of the animal species. Also, there is a very close connection to the forest, with people and culture. In the peripheries of the Mirage Forest Reserve, you would find remnants of the cocoa and sugar, cocoa plantations and sugar production. You would, at some, especially where there are some road accesses into the forest reserve, you would see some of the shade trees that, like the immortals, for example, that are still there, and some of the small cocoa plants just are still existing in those areas. We have some of the old structures also still present. Then there's also that spiritual connection. Through oral tradition, there's always been a lot of the ancestors would have brought a lot of their tradition from with them when they were brought to the island. So for example, the African slaves, many of them from West Africa, there's a strong oral tradition, there's a strong tradition and connection with the forest, where they believe, it's an area, the forest is an important space to meet and discuss important matters and for prayer. And there's, a lot of the spirits, we are closely connected with the forest spirits, and they are able to respond to us. So, and a lot of that still continues today in various forms. Many folk tales are also associated with the Mirage Forest Reserve. For example, you would have heard of the silk cotton tree. If you cut down a silk cotton tree, bad things will happen to you. Or for example, if you want if you wish to have the help from a spirit, you need to bring a silver coin and a sealed bottle of rum, sacrifice the coin to the spirits by putting it into the roots of the trees, and you ask for whatever you desire. And you open the rum, and basically you're sharing the rum between yourself and the tree, while communing with the tree and your spirits there until the bottle of rum is done. So that some of those are some of the old folk tales that have been handed down over the years. Ryan would have touched a bit on hunting. This is still something that a lot of persons do because it's connected to their livelihoods and to some extent as well. It is a sport for quite a few persons. Medicines, again, traditions handed down through oral and folklore, etc. There are a lot of plants that are taken and used and continue to be used by many people that believe in, and first extract to treat different ailments, for example. And even now, scientists are even relying on some of these plants to be able to extract some of the compounds that are important for medicines. And an interesting thing is, like, for example, mud. For Tobago Carnival, mud is often harvested from certain areas of the Mirage Forest Reserve because of the properties of that mud that makes it best suited for juve and for revelry, right? So these are some of the acute, the key connections between our culture as well as the Mirage Forest Reserve. Which brings me now to the Northeast Tobago Man and Biosphere Reserve. So I would have mentioned earlier that initially there was some, exploration of designating the Main Ridge Forest Reserve as a heritage site. However, due to the connection, the very close connection of the forest reserve to the different communities, as well as to the marine space that's available, it was thought that really the best definition or the best designation for this space is the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. And what the reserve is supposed to do is that it's supposed to look at conservation, development, and logistical support. So it's supposed to look at protecting what we have already present, the biodiversity that is present, and the ecosystem services that are afforded by the various ecosystems present within the Biosphere Reserve, while at the same time protecting the livelihoods that are dependent on these different ecosystem services, as well as the environment surrounding. It's also looking at ensuring that there's research that's continuing. You can support studies, you can support protection, you can support tourism, and again, various livelihoods. So these are the different functions of the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. It was declared on the 28th of October 2020. And I have to put in that it's not an award. So it's simply a declaration, which means that we need to now maintain that designation. We need to make sure that we uphold and continue to manage the space in, as a Man and Biosphere Reserve. So currently, the Environmental Research Institute Charleville, who's putting a lot of work into this particular designation, they're working on the management plan, which is looking at all the different facets that would impact on the natural as well as the built up areas of the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. Within the reserve, you would have seen the fancy map that I showed earlier on, which showed the Main Ridge Forest Reserve as well as other areas colored off. And these represent different zones within the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Reserve. And the Main Ridge Forest Reserve actually is part of what we call the core zone. So the core zone is a strictly protected area for biodiversity conservation, scientific research, and really ecosystem preservation. So it is just enhancing or adding on to the protection that's already there for the Main Ridge Forest Reserve. Whereas the transition supposed to act as like the outermost zone where you have human activity and development really occurring, but it's also managed and ensuring that there is a harmony with your environment. And then you have your buffer zones, which will surround your core zone, which is supposed to sort of act as that area between your transition and your core. So really the core zone is where we hope to continue to protect the Main Ridge Forest Reserve and all its functions, as well as at least the livelihoods that are associated with it. So I will now hand you back to Ryan, who will wrap up more or less the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Lanya. All right, so before we come to our conclusion, one thing about still cutting tree, in Tobago, the Gangamsara site, which was a large still cutting tree, we lost that site. It was one of our items on the inventory list a few years ago due to bad weather. But this highlights the importance of the protection we need for our big trees, as well as different types of natural heritage. Okay, because due to climate change, we lose these trees, but as well as due to development, we'll have issues with some of the natural heritage. She also mentioned the hermit crabs. The hermit crabs, yes, it is that link between terrestrial and marine habitats, but in Tobago in particular, the reason they are so important Tobago has no kobos. Tobago has no vultures. On islands like Little Tobago, these hermit crabs perform that ecosystem service of both a seed disperser as well as organism that would break down organic matter, the carrion, etc. All right, so it performs an important function, moving nutrients on the island as well as dispersing seeds on the island. So a simple thing, removing large shells, you remove that link for hermit crabs that also perform a terrestrial function. So we need to be cognizant of little things like this. Loss of habitat, loss of shells, loss of watersheds. It means that we would potentially lose the ecosystem on Little Tobago if we don't manage these things well. So in conclusion, we also want to tie in the indigenous and local knowledge on biodiversity. And a good example of this, as was touched earlier, was bush medicine. The Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, as well as UNESCO, acknowledges the role of ILK in the management of biodiversity. But also we need to pay attention to the way we manage our waste. We need to reduce waste production. Additionally, to protect our forests, we need to we see the issues with illegal, unregulated, and poorly regulated removal of forests. And this happens for a wide array of reasons: housing, quarries, agriculture. So we need to now consider how best to utilize resources sustainably so we don't consistently lose forests. All right, and we have a green policy in Trinidad, but yet every time we see some sort of development happening, we always ensure we have enough air conditioning units and a generator to power the air conditioning units when electricity goes. This is not green engineering. We need to start to adopt these things so that we could help manage our forests. And if we remove our forests, we will have an increase in ambient temperature. We already know in the city area, in built-up area, we have elevated temperatures in comparison to the forested areas. Remove more forests, we'll have an increase in ambient temperature. Remove forests, we'll have issues with water security. There'll be a decrease in water security, the water quality, the quantity, and availability, because forests promotes our watersheds, and watersheds is what promotes availability of water for Trinidad and Tobago. And lastly, remove the forests, we'll have a decrease in food security, due to an increase in potential pests and vermin, a decrease in pollinators such as bees, and subsequently we'll have an increase in food prices. Now, interestingly enough, in 2022, and now this is not an issue I'm bringing up about the US. I know every time it's on TV hearing about the US, but in 2022, Elon Musk funded $100 billion US X-Prize carbon removal project. And this is very interesting because when I heard about this, my immediate thought was, we just need to protect our planet's forests and oceans. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Okay. So with that, thank you. I want to say a special thanks to National Trust and the staff, Joseph, and particularly Joseph and Renata for helping facilitate this presentation, as well as the Environmental Research Institute for the work that they did in drafting the Man and Biosphere Reserve dossiers for UNESCO, as well as the Main Ridge Forest Reserve dossier for the National Trust. This picture is not in Trinidad, of Trinidad, but it highlights the importance of a single tree to a community. And this is where we see the importance of our forests to communities. Thank you, and now invite questions. Joseph?
Dr. Mohammed and Ms. Fanovich-Mohammed, thank you both very much for the presentation. I can speak for everyone. We learned so much. So thank you both for the work, firstly, that you all have dedicated your lives to, and for also participating in this conversation, leading us through. So, my friends, please use the chat box so that we can have the questions read to Dr. Mohammed and Ms. Fanovich-Mohammed. But in the meantime, while the questions are coming in, I would like to begin with the point about the pests within the forests. You all made such a great case for the circle of life that happens within the forest and how it would affect human living and culture, etc. But in terms of this importance of each species, why do we have the term pest, quote unquote? As my first question to you guys.
All right. So it's not just pest. Pest is a designation given to any organism that would cause harm to humanity in some way. All right. It might be plant or animal. That's why we have pesticides that are largely herbicides, but you also have pesticides that kill insects as well as rodents. Right. So pest is a broad term. Under our legislation and Conservation and Wildlife Act, they don't use the word pest, they use the word vermin, right? And vermin would include some of our rodent species like rats. It'll include the vampire bats. It includes other things like squirrels. Each one of these organisms, they also have a particular function in the ecosystem. The issue is not one of at the organism level. The issue is with humans. We have given it the term vermin because we don't want it, and it negatively impacts our existence. All right. But if we didn't exist, these organisms will still exist in equilibrium with the ecosystem. So what we have to do now is find mechanisms to reduce their impact to humans while at the same time ensuring that they still contribute to their ecosystem services. All right. I don't know if anybody remember a Disney cartoon called Lilo and Stitch, but
yes,
one of the premises of that movie was that Earth was the last sanctuary in the now this is fictional, this is not fact. Earth was the last sanctuary in the entire universe that could facilitate mosquitoes, and humans was the facilitator to ensure mosquitoes existed. All right. So now this is a far-fetched thought, but at the same time, we have to draw back to the biology that this philosophy is rooted in. Pests are organisms that exist that just negatively impact the way humans exist. But we have to find mechanisms because they exist because they are part of the ecosystem.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the question. Now, in the chat, Ms. Bishop asked about the current status of the Valencia Forest Reserve. Not 100% sure if we can answer that.
So that is a sensitive, tricky one because that entire area, it's adjacent to the Matura Reserve. It's adjacent to the Aripo Scientific Reserve. It is bounded by various types of development. One case in point is a highway development going very close, creating boundaries and barriers to the movement of our organisms like ocelots. So the status of it is that if we don't, and I made the point of unregulated and poorly regulated and non-regulated. These are three different categories. The development that is happening there is one that went through the EIA process. It went through the various governmental approvals, but it still exists, and it's going to negatively impact on the ecosystems. So I like to use that as an example of a system that a situation that is regulated but was not regulated with all the best information at hand, because at the end of the day, with all the legislation, to me, and this is my personal opinion, good sense that prevail to ensure that we have the existence of the forest in a manner that could sustain biodiversity.
Understood completely. Thank you very much for handling that. Another question coming in based on what you all would have presented, mentioning the London Bridge rock. The question is, where is it So jump right in quickly. We have many questions to ask and answer.
So London Bridge Rock is actually a small natural arch formation of St. Giles. So if it is that I were to jump to this map here, I think this little dot will represent the location of London Bridge of the St. Giles Islet complex. And if you can see, for those of you who have a large enough screen, this is the island of St. Giles, and London Bridge would be this rock. So it's a really nice dive site. And yeah, it's a natural arch formation.
Oh, and close to St. Giles, Tobago,
Yes.
right? Next question coming through the chat. Do you have any information on the status of the Champion Tree Initiative that was spearheaded by the Forestry Division, ODPM, and UE?
The Champion Tree Initiative, that was the one where they was doing some reforestation of Mora. Was that the one that was on the slopes near Hillview College? Because both of these initiatives happened, but one of the challenges we have with reforestation initiatives is once the funding dries up and we finish planting trees, there's no consistent management because of restricted resources. And I mean, the Forestry Division, they try to manage the forest as best the way that they could, but they are very, very limited in the resources, human resources, as well as other types of resources, such as vehicles, and recording mechanisms to pay attention to monitoring and management of some systems. So with Champion one, I am not 100% clear on which one that is, but that is the status of most of these initiatives.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We just have a little bit of research to do where that particular initiative is concerned, but it sounds quite interesting and quite necessary. In terms of quarrying, do we have you all noticed much illegal quarrying that would affect forests?
Okay, so quarrying is another sensitive one. I believe I do have these stats in front of me, but Trinidad definitely have more than 20 quarries in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay, we know this.
Yeah.
But it is surprising to know how much of them are actually legal. And I think it might be less than 5, in the sense that these are quarries that have a permit to conduct quarrying activities. And the permitting system is, I'm not sure how tricky it is, but the issues that are there with quarrying is that they don't fall under the typical gambit of regulations for other types of development. All right. So you could, a few years ago, fish farmers, some potential fish farmers were telling me it was easier for them to start a quarry than to start a fish farm. All right.
Okay.
So that in itself might tell you some of the challenges we have with sustainable development. Because if we have a lot of illegal quarries, the quarries they sell the rubble, they sell the aggregate to someone. And strange enough, ironically, one of the big consumers of aggregate from quarries, wherever the quarries might exist, is the state. All right.
Is the
So we have to be cognizant in the way we manage these resources. And I'm glad we have procurement legislation and all of these things now, but it's now to implement these things to regulate sustainable and promote sustainable development. We need to use the legislation for the greater good of green in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. As we kind of wrap up, because we're looking at the time, my last question would be, is what can we do essentially as lay persons, as persons who may not necessarily be living close to or near to forests and so on, what do you think we can do to assist in saving our forests?
Okay, so one, manage your waste. All right. I know a while back, people were thinking the answer to waste was recycling. Recycling is actually the last mechanism of managing waste. What we have to do is reduce the amount of waste we produce, because the dumps we have, they utilize what was once forested lands. Okay. So we need to regulate, we need to reduce the amount of waste we produce. All right. A project that was done a few years ago by one of the students in Northeast Tobago, we calculated that monthly, very close to 100,000 plastic bottles was generated by Tobago in consumption. All right. And this was just based on water bottles. All of these plastic bottles have to go somewhere. And plenty of people say, oh, we recycle, so we could use as much plastic water bottles as we want. That's not the answer, because Trinidad doesn't have a recycling plant as yet. So I just use that as one example, but we need to reduce how much waste we produce. The other thing is we need to, I mean, yeah, I know the place hot, but the answer is not putting in an AC in every house, in every building. Okay. Yes, that will reduce the temperature on the inside, but it generates elevated temperatures on the outside. We need to think about the way we design and construct, and it doesn't mean to be, we need to be expensive, fancy buildings. Back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, we had houses with higher roofs, so that was vented to allow hot air to escape. We need to move back into some of these old heritage type designs for buildings that would naturally allow ventilation without the use of an AC unit. Okay. Other things like water security, control our wastewater. All right. If every household would manage the gray water, all right, we would have better water quality and better forestry management as well. Things like food security, the amount of imported food you're bringing in, the amount of food that we consume that is imported actually has a negative impact on forestry, because we focus a lot on things that are, again, packaged and not things that are locally produced. If we consume more local foods, that it will give a rise to sustainable development of agriculture in bulk. All right. So these are some of the things that will generally help not just the ecosystem, but the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. And it will protect our forests, it will protect the watershed, it will protect the wind belt, it will protect the island as a whole. Climate change will happen, but it's how we manage, mitigate, and adapt to these issues.
Get you. Thank you very much. And just to go back just a little bit to the Champion Tree Initiative. In the chat, we have that it is a global project, and it has been implemented locally in Trinidad and Tobago to preserve and conserve the elite or superior trees. These elite trees are expected to possess, among others, the following characteristics: straight cylindrical boles, large crowns, thin branches with wide branch angles, resistant to pests and diseases. The initiative is being pursued to record these large trees of any species in the establishment of the National Tree Register. The initiative should preserve and clone these trees to mirror or create exact replicas to continue this species using new and advanced technologies in cloning techniques. So that is what Miss Chandra D. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
All right, Joseph, in the chat, if you could copy that information she sent
Sure.
and send it to me, because that's important. I also touch base with Celeste as well regarding.
Great.
Because this is a good initiative.
Wonderful. I'm happy to hear that. Thank you very much for putting that in the chat. And last thing about the Queen's Park Savannah. What is happening with the Queen's Park Savannah earmarked, recreation purposes only, sure, but the poetry trees continue to be chopped down and nothing is being replanted. It's just a vast dry plain. The Queen's Park Savannah can be a central park of a capital city. So just briefly.
Yeah, I could touch on that a little bit. All
Mhm.
right, so I know there was an initiative to have a Queen's Park Savannah committee, of which the trust would be one of the members on that committee, and,
Mhm.
the drive on this was to also promote the green spaces within the Queen's Park Savannah, the historical heritage, as well as the green spaces. So a management plan is needed for the Queen's Park Savannah and the surrounding buildings. With regards to the cutting edge trees, these are old trees, and we need to adopt better practices with regard to how we manage old trees.
Yeah.
And some of the issues might be the trees dying. So to decrease liability, the trees are cut. All right. But
Mhm.
because the trees are cut, it also means we need to replant. And this is where some of the management aspect of green, because Queen's Park Savannah, I'm sure people notice there are WASA valves are all around Queen's Park Savannah. The Queen's Park
Yes.
Savannah is could be deemed an aquifer, all right, because of how much water it absorbs and is utilized as well, right? So we have to, I agree, we need to have a management plan for Queen's Park Savannah. If one exists already, I'm not sure, but clearly if one exists and not implemented or need to be amended to ensure we don't have continued loss of our large trees, and also ensure that we are planting of new trees.
Gotcha. Gotcha 100%. And thank you very much for that. And thank you for putting these concerns and questions in the chat, my friends. Thank you all very much. And my friends, oh, there's so many other questions in the chat. What about the protection of the trees in the botanic gardens? Quickly.
Okay, so the trees in the Botanic Gardens is one of the sites that I believe a dossier needs to be prepared for that site, so it could be graded because it has historical as well as biodiversity importance, heritage importance there. So now some of the trees in there would be dying because they're so old naturally. Okay, fortunately, the majority of trees are still alive and well, but resources are needed for the management again of these. I know there's a Friends of the Botanic Garden Society that which is a registered NGO that tries to promote the management and the survival of the botanic gardens. But again, funding tends to be an issue, but we also tied up a lot in the legislation because the Botanic Garden is still part of state. It's under, I believe it's under Horticultural Society, not Society, Horticultural Division in Ministry of Agriculture. It's also the garden for the President's house. So it a lot of bureaucracy we need to be able to cut through to develop management plans sometime. But I agree, it needs to be addressed.
Understood. Thank you very much. And my friends, thank you all very much for your interest and your passionate interest in our forests and in our trees, and actually in terms of conservation. This is amazing for me to see. And I would like to thank our chair. I just want to go through the chat. Sorry, the attendees a little bit. I would like to thank our chair. Yes, our chair, Miss Margaret McDowell, is in the meeting and she is definitely taking notes. So when we do make a call for our environmentalists, I'm looking for all of you all to participate. Thank you all very much for everything that you all have said and so on within the chat. A special thank you to Lanya Fanovich-Mohammed and Dr. Mohammed for taking us through our paces today. But quickly, there's one question that I think is necessary that we need to kind of use to wrap up. Someone asked about where can we find more information about the work that you all are doing and I guess continuing to do and in order for us to follow along and thus be part of.
All right. So definitely my involvement with the trust is to promote some of our natural heritage. So I think first step is follow and become a member of the trust, because all of the activities that we doing, I want the trust to have that trust in promoting natural heritage. So that's one mechanism.
You heard it
Another-
first. Join the National Trust of
Yes.
Trinidad.
So that's my plug. The second one,
Nice.
the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalist Club is also a good group. It's also one of the long-standing NGOs that promote biodiversity and the understanding of biodiversity within Trinidad. They have a journal as well, and several of the biodiversity things that I have published. Lanya and I have published, went into that local journal. Reason being, we want to make it available to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It doesn't make sense everything going to an international journal where the majority of Trinidad and Tobago won't have access to it.
Understood.
So
Field Naturalist Club, your
we want
publication.
to ensure the information is available, not just by blogging or social media, but through credible systems to ensure that we could have proper dialogue and utilization of the information that we promote. Another thing is, I would love to see the general public get more familiar with our legislation. We don't have to be a lawyer to be familiar with legislation. The Conservation of Wildlife Act, the Forestry Act is downloadable. You just Google it and you see the act and it's a PDF. And you don't have to understand everything in it, but it will have, if you read it, 5% or 10% of the things you might understand, and other people will understand things too, and you have a discussion about it. Familiarize yourselves with the legislation of Trinidad and Tobago. So when the decision makers do things contrary, we have a voice.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
An
Thank you very
educated
much.
voice.
Could you just repeat the name of the journal?
The Living World Journal is from the Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalist Club.
Living World Journal from the Field Naturalist Club. Thank you very
And
much.
just one last thing.
Yes.
I mean, if you do a search online, look up for any environmental NGOs in Trinidad and Tobago. They're all doing different, implementing different programs, touching on different aspects of the environment. So if you go look them up, follow them, you would find out a lot about what is actually happening as well, in terms of the conservation and restoration work that they're doing, and advocacy, etc.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the questions. Thank you for the responses. Thank you for taking us through our paces in learning about the forests. It was an amazing and very informative presentation. If we go through the chat, everybody has said so. So thank you both very much for the presentation. And as I understand, we now have a full team who is going to be working with us on the on the environment and the natural side of the National Trust. Once again, you're very inspired. Come true. Fantastic. So my friends, thank you all very much for joining us. The Living World, yes, in the chat, my friends, is the name of the journal, Living World Journal, Trinidad and Tobago Field Naturalist Club. Right? Thank you all very much for staying all the way. Half an hour extra. I love the conversation. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And just as a little bit of information, come Friday, we have another session with the Spiritual Baptist community at Millfleur. And next month, the 20th of April, we have our Easter celebrations as well at Millfleur. So you can check that out. For those who are not members, join and become members. And for those who are members and you need to renew, our AGM is coming up. So please do not forget to do the needful. To our presenters, Lanya Fanovich-Mohammed and Dr. Ryan Mohammed, to you, we say thank you. We say thank you for the presentation. We say thank you for the work that you both do for Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you all
Welcome.
very
Welcome.
much on behalf of the National Trust and on behalf of all who are in this meeting this evening. 51 people has stayed on just to listen to us talk a little bit. I see our chair, Ms. McDowell. Just want to probably put you on the spot just for one moment to say just a few words to the room.
No, I'd just like to say thank you again, Ryan and Lanya. You're real friends of the trust as well as part of the trust. And I'm really glad that so many people were interested. I was very, very pleased at the questions, particularly, especially the extra questions that made us go on for a little extra half an hour. And, you know, this is good. Remember that you can also, if your friends missed it, you can contact Joseph later on and he will tell you how you can get a copy of the transcript and so that you can get some more information. So all the best to everybody. In case I don't see you before Easter, you must come to our event, but happy Easter. And before that, we have two other celebrations. We have the Eid, which is coming up right this weekend, and we have the Spiritual Baptist
Yes.
Day and their celebration. So we have a lot going on, and please continue to be with us. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Margaret McDowell, the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago. So, my friends, this brings us to the end of our Tut Bagay lecture. And as usual, we have refreshments for you. Down to the left and open your fridge. It's right there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much and happy Eid, happy Spiritual Baptist Day to all. And soon happy Easter if I do not see you before then. So my friends, do enjoy the rest of your evening. The recording will be available. Just give the National Trust a buzz, 225-4750, or shoot me an email and we can make things happen. joseph.bertrand@nationaltrust.tt. Do have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Bye-bye.